YouTube. You have it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Becky Robinson, and I am so thrilled to be here today with Lindsay Barnett to celebrate and learn about her new book, Working Hell to Working Well. So, as you come in this morning, this afternoon, whatever time it is where you are, we want to let you know that the chat is a vibrant place for you to stay engaged and connected throughout this event. So, we welcome you to share your questions, comments, and thoughts throughout today's event. And we would love for this to be an enriching and engaging time for you. So if you could take a moment and let us know where you're calling in from, we would love to know. And if you happen to be attending this event today as part of your professional development, go ahead and let us know what company you represent, and I'll do my best to give your organization a shout out because we're so thrilled that folks take part in these webinars as a chance to grow professionally. Lindsay, do you want to say hi to everybody as we get started?
Hi, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, it looks like we've got Indianapolis, Indiana. We have Oakland, California. We have someone in LA, where you are as well, Lindsay.
Yeah.
Rochester, New York, Skokie, Illinois, Birmingham, Alabama, London, England. We have someone in Sweden, in Lubbock, Texas. Welcome in LA to the USC School of Pharmacy. And it looks like we also have a caller from South Africa. So
Oh,
thanks
wow.
to those of you who are letting us know where you're calling in from. I'll look for more throughout today's event, but it is always a thrill to welcome participants from around the world. So thank you for investing your time with us. One more thing, we want our events to be as inclusive as possible. And so you might notice that we do have the ability for you to turn on those closed captions if that would be a benefit to you. That's in the bottom of your Zoom panel. And we have Wendy Hahn on hand today who will be helping us by moderating the chat. So if you need any help at all during today's event, why don't you go ahead and check in with Wendy, and she'll be thrilled to support you. So again, if you joined after I said it, we are here today to learn about Lindsay Barnett's new book, Working Hell to Working Well. It's such a beautiful cover and such an amazing concept. Let me tell you a little bit about Lindsay. She's an executive coach and an HR consultant with over 2 decades of experience working with Fortune 500 companies and growing startups. I mentioned that Lindsay lives in LA. She lives there with her husband, her 2 kids, and a very big dog who unfortunately we're not going to have the chance to see on today's call or hear.
Thankfully.
I've heard. So we put Lindsay's entire bio in the chat if you'd like to learn more about her career and background. But we're really thrilled throughout today's event for you to get to know the ideas from her book. And I'm going to show it to you one more time. I'm so happy that I have it. And we would love to engage all of you in a poll so that we can get to know a little bit about what brings you to today's event. So here we go. This is our Working Well or Working Hell poll. So, what best describes your current work experience? Do you feel constantly busy and stressed? Are you productive, but it's hard to maintain balance? Do you feel mostly in harmony with your work and life? Or are you burned out and looking for change? We're going to give you a few moments to answer. And if you have a different perspective that is not represented by one of the responses that we typed, please feel free to let us know that in the chat as well. I'm going to give you a few more moments. It looks like about 60% of you have participated in the poll, and we'd love to make sure we get as many responses as possible. So, Lindsay, have you done a poll like this before with audiences interested in your book?
I have not yet because this is week one of the book being
Amazing.
out. So very
Amazing.
excited to see what the results are. So it will give me a little bit more data beyond just the anecdotal conversations that I'm having.
Well, let's take a look here. And I am curious to know how I would answer this poll. I'm not sure. Here we go on the results. So about 18% of you feel constantly busy and stressed. 52% say you're productive, but it's hard to maintain balance. 23% feel mostly in harmony with work and life.
Yay.
And about 16% are burned out and looking for change. So thank you, all of you who have taken the time to share your thoughts on the poll. And we can dive into the topic. So, Lindsay, as we start today, anybody who writes a book, and I'm going to show it again, I have to. Anybody who writes a book that includes the phrase "working hell," for me, it sparks this curiosity of what is it that inspired you to write this particular book at this particular time.
Yeah. So there's a few different things that sparked for me, and I think the first one is probably like most people during the pandemic. I had two young kids who were not really attending school. I had a very busy full-time job, and all the other things that were happening in the social atmosphere around us. And so I really got burned out, and I also was starting to recognize that I was turning into a workaholic. Losing some of the boundaries between work and home was not helping me. And so what I finally ended up doing, I kind of went through my own journey of dealing with the challenges that I was having with managing and creating work-life harmony for myself. But I also was very fortunate because my company at the time of, the Great Resignation, and when companies, even though we've overly course corrected a little bit these days, but companies were really eager to keep people and were offering amazing flexibility like part time. And so I was very fortunate to have a very progressive leader who allowed me to present some options to work part time. And so what I recognized is that making that shift to part time really allowed me to create more space for myself, for the other parts of my life, and really recognize that work is just part of who I am, not all of who I am. But what was interesting, and where this dovetails into the book, is while for me, going part time really enabled me to have that experience, as I was working with a lot of my coaching clients, I was finding that they had similar practices that were supporting their work life harmony, yet they were still working full time. So it really debunked a little bit for me about the myth of, it's about time only, right? We can have work life harmony and really look at it in different ways. And then beyond that, I also was able to attend a conference called the World Happiness Summit. And while I was there, it was all about workplace well being. And I really picked up a lot there. But the biggest nugget for me, which I share in the book, is talking about some of these best practices with leaders in the well-being space. And one person shared with me that when they leave the office, they make a habit of leaving loudly. And that is, closing the laptop, making a show of turning off the lights, more or less letting the door slam, on the way out. But there was something to declaring publicly, I am leaving. I am going to go do this life bit now. And I think what really struck a chord with me about that is, in a lot of ways, we talk about wellness or well being as a very individual activity. But when we are role modeling well being, it now becomes a collective opportunity. And so the more of us who leave loudly really make it easier for the all of us to use less social or political capital when it's time for us to leave at the end of the day, right? So that to me, I think really anchored a lot of what this book is about, is how can I be the change from a well-being perspective, and by my role modeling it, that supports others on their well-being journey as well.
Wow, that is super powerful, Lindsay. And I'm sitting here thinking and curious about, for those of us who may primarily work from home, is there a way to model that leaving loudly and be that role model that you're describing? So, do you have any ideas about that? Because I know you're working from home right now. So,
Yeah,
how do you
yeah.
leave loudly?
So it's funny you mentioned that because one of the things that I did during the pandemic that I've carried forward is walking meetings. So if I had a normally scheduled Zoom call, I would often, email people or text people in advance and say, hey, do we need to be on Zoom? Do we need to look at anything? Or are you okay if I walk? And I would say at least 50% of the time, people would say, oh, great, I'll go get my shoes on too. So not only are you role modeling it, but you're actively supporting someone else in a well-being practice for them too.
Amazing. I love that. And sometimes I don't know about you, but I can get super distracted on a Zoom call. Whereas if I were taking that walking meeting, I can really focus only just on the person on the other end of the phone.
Yes, I feel that exact same way because you don't have all these other distractions, right? I feel like if you're on a Zoom call, you could be getting a text, getting an email, getting an instant message chat. All these things can be happening simultaneously, and it's very hard to stay focused. So yeah, so the walking meeting gives you also a little bit of that mindfulness boost
Mm.
too.
So, Lindsay, I noticed that you use the phrase work-life harmony more frequently than you use the phrase work-life balance. So, how do you view those two as different?
Yeah. For me, there's something about work-life balance that implies kind of a 50-50. And I think what I've recognized for myself is that I'm not always going to be 50-50. I may, during a workday, need to phone my kid's school, or I may need to go to the doctor, or I may try to squeeze in a yoga class, or I may be thinking about, something else that's happening in my personal life, friends getting into an argument, right? And that's taking over some of my day. And so I'm trained as an integral coach, and really a lot of what we try to support people with is recognizing that all parts of us are integrated. And so to think that we're going to have kind of a severance experience for people who watch that show on Apple, right? Where it's like I am in work and I am in life. It's not necessarily true to what really happens. And I remember even before this work life harmony concept, kind of came into, the zeitgeist for me. I remember speaking with a senior female executive at a previous company, and I was just asking her about, life as a working mom. Had a fairly new, young child at the time, and I was like, how do you do it? And I remember her saying to me, more or less, I just go where I need to go. And
Mhm.
at the time, I didn't really know what to make of that, but now I really see it as that's what work life harmony is. There are some days that it's all work, right? If you're an accountant and it's April 10th, you are in work mode.
Mhm.
But maybe on May 1st, you can lighten up a little bit, right? And you can enjoy life and, make plans with friends. So how can we be more in the moment of what life is calling on us to do?
Well, it seems like in some ways with that model, you have to separate yourself from always watching the clock. So if you've been in a mindset of like work is 8 to 5 or work is 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, you almost have to separate yourself from the clock and you're doing what you need to do when you need to do it, or you are where you need to be
Yeah.
when you need to be there.
Yeah. And I think maybe that's part of the reason why work life harmony is resonating so much for me and I think others now, because I'm seeing a lot of other people posting about it. I think the pandemic really shifted our ways of working so that we are going into the office and then leaving early to go pick up a kid and then getting back online. So there is a little bit of 9 to 5 isn't really how we work anymore. The problem is that we're working all the time. So there is a time element, but how do we find our way within that?
That makes sense. And I'm wondering, what's your view on how we can each take an active role in creating that harmony in our own lives? And I'm especially wondering this for people who may work in corporate environments where
Mm,
there is an expectation of a certain like work within a certain time frame.
yeah. So I can answer that in two ways. I think, one is just in general, right? How do we just be more mindful about our ways of working? I feel like even just noticing, okay, I'm working on this project right now and I'm trying to get it done, but I'm feeling in my body very antsy. I can't focus. Okay, maybe I need to just take a 5 minute walk, or I need to just go grab some tea and get some natural light and fresh air on me for 5 minutes, right? There are really a lot of little mini moments that we can take advantage of throughout our day to feel more in harmony and more aligned with our ways of working that still fit into a normal 9 to 5 expectation. Um, that's one answer. The other answer is if you're actually wanting to figure out more flexible ways of working, I do have a whole section in the book dedicated to that and how you might want to have that discussion and really figure out, okay, this is how I work best. How do I now start to look at the construct of my job?
Amazing. So in the book, you also talk about fear-based behaviors and
Mm,
how our fears might make us feel like we don't have choices, or time or
yeah.
space for those choices. So how
Yeah.
can you break that down for us?
Yeah, and so what I try to address in the book are what I see as the three primary fears, at least that I see a lot in my coaching clients as well as in myself. And those three fears are fear of failure, fear of inadequacy, and fear of rejection. And what I've found and observed is that those fears often spur certain behaviors that may then kind of get us into a place where we are largely overworking in some shape or form. Um, and so they each have a little bit of different behaviors that go along with them. But just to give you an example, one of my common fears is fear of rejection. And so I am a classic people pleaser. Been working on that for a very long time. Have my own ways around that. But one of the big behaviors of a people pleaser is overcommitting because we can't say no, right? So if you can find a way to recognize what's the fear that might be driving the behavior and what behavior is that actually translating into, then you might be able to find a new way of responding. So for me, I came up with a mantra which I put on a sticky note on next to my computer that said just because I can doesn't mean I should. And so that, in a lot of ways protected me from myself. And so just by not overcommitting, I get a lot of time back. So it's something that I am always working on because I am a bit of a time optimist and I love what I do. And I always think, oh, yeah, that's easy. I can do it in no time. So it is something that, I'm actively working on. But those are the kinds of things that you can see if once you recognize, oh, it's the fear chiming in. What is the behavior that's actually resulting from that? And what's maybe a new behavior or another way that I can practice being in a place of either working more harmoniously or more protective of my time and energy.
And it seems like that mantra could work at work, but it also could work at home.
Yes.
To reference
Yes.
the conversation we had before the webinar started.
Yes. Yes.
It seems like in order to shift away from the mindset of like playing into our fears, um, we need to first become aware of what it is that's driving that behavior.
Yeah, exactly. And I capture that in the book of, I call it kind of the more time now approach, right? So how can we keep something sticky in our mind to remind us of we all want more time now.
For sure. Well, one of the things you introduce in the book is the three C's, and I love the concept of the three C's. So I'm hoping you can introduce those to our listeners and talk to us about how those three C's can help us with managing our energy.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think when we're thinking about work-life harmony, there's time, which is there is only 24 hours in a day, right? Like we can't control for that. Even Beyonce has only 24 hours in a day. Uh, but energy is very different. If we are in a task that we do not like and do not enjoy, 15 minutes feels like a very long 15 minutes. But if we are in something that we love, 15 minutes feels like a nanosecond. So, a lot of what I talk about when I talk about the three C's is around how do we look at our energy as a way of also supporting our work life harmony. And so the three C's stand for creative energy, connection energy, and completion energy. And so the idea behind these is if you are feeling like you need some sort of energetic boost, it just opens up beyond kind of the typical energies people think about, like, oh, I need to exercise, or I didn't get enough sleep, or I need food, right? Like those are very commonly talked about. But I think what I noticed for myself, even as I was writing the book, right? Writing the book is a big source of creative energy, but there would be times where I was just starting to feel like that was starting to seep out, and I needed some other way of giving myself a full tank of gas again. And so that might be then using connective energy. That could be phoning a friend, taking a walk with a friend, taking a hike with a friend gives like an even bigger connection energy because you're giving connection to nature, connection to the friend, connection to your body, right? There's so many, I think of connection very expansively. Um, so that can be, a dose of that. And then completion energy. So taking the book again as an example, this is a long task. It is not something that is done overnight. And so sometimes it can feel like it's just never done. And so for me, finding another hit, so to speak, of
Mhm.
completion helps me kind of feel more resilient. So, I know we were talking before the call, I was joking about how laundry is somehow my big completion energy, where it's like, oh, I like had this huge load of laundry and now it is sitting here in this basket all nicely folded, ready to be put away. I feel so good. I got, my hit of completion energy. And so I just share in the book that you can use these interchangeably all the time, together, separate, or whatnot, but it's just an alternative source of energy, a new way of thinking about how to infuse ourselves in times when we need a little bit of a kick.
Yeah, I'm seeing in the chat that that this idea of the three C's is really resonating with
Oh,
folks.
good.
And I can even imagine a world in which I start to ask myself that on a regular basis, like, oh, like what do I need right now? Like I need connection energy. Maybe I should go to the office and be with
Yeah,
people, or I
yeah,
need completion energy. So let me see what I can mark off my list. That's an easy win, an easy task. So then I have momentum for whatever else is on my list.
yeah,
So thank you so much for that powerful concept. Um, so you have another alliterative concept in your book that I love, planning, pacing, and playing.
yes.
So can you share with our listeners what these mean and how they can also help us create a more sustainable and harmonious and fulfilling work
Yeah,
life?
yeah. So, a lot of how I structured my book was one, it's for really busy people and people who want to take action. So, if you're feeling stuck, the way out of getting stuck is taking even the smallest actions. And so, what I share with people is like, okay, where do I start? Right? I want to get moving. I want greater work life harmony, or I am feeling burnt out and I need to make a change. Whatever place you're starting from, I wanted to give people a model to be able to, get moving. um, and so the three P's, as you mentioned, stand for planning, pacing, and playing. And so planning to me is really just actioning your commitments. So you don't necessarily need to have an Excel spreadsheet of a plan. One of the things that the examples that I share in the book is a friend who wanted to get healthier, and all she did was buy a bigger water bottle. That's it. That was she actioned on her commitment, and I guess what? She lost weight, her skin was glowing, she felt better, all of these things. That was all she did. That was her plan, right? So I talk a lot about planning as, what's my one commitment, or what am I going to commit to. The actual planning is where we start to see the actions. And then pacing is a variety of things. So pacing can look like, as I mentioned earlier, right? I'm feeling fidgety in my body. So something is off in my pacing. What do I need to do? Do I need to take some deep breaths? Do I need to take a walk? What does that look like? How do I appropriately pace? That can also apply to how we operate digitally, right? What are we doing in terms of our digital wellness? How do we pace ourselves? Are we doom scrolling for hours, right? How do we support ourselves in terms of pacing? And it also applies in the work setting from, I think about pacing from how am I bringing others along with me? So if we are fast and done, because we're like gunning for that completion energy, if we're too fast, sometimes we're not bringing others with us. So just being mindful of the pacing can support us in not getting too far ahead, because sometimes when we get too far ahead of people in the workplace, we end up having to do a lot of rework because we didn't bring people in at the right time. So that's another way to kind of save time and energy. And then playing to me can really be, can be anything. But the the important thing about playing, I think, is one, we don't take ourselves too seriously, which may allow us to make a little bit of a pause, as well as it puts us in a more curious space. So we're not again in that seriousness, right? We're able to just be more curious, be more experimental. Let's try it. Let's see what happens, right? And you can also just embed play in general. I know in a lot of my leadership development programs, I really try to make sure that they are fun and that people are laughing and enjoying themselves while they're learning, because it's a lot easier to learn together when we're not um, so worried about performing, right? When we're playing, it's a lot easier to learn and not be so concerned about that.
So what jumps out at me from those P's is the pacing. And I'm
Mm,
curious, Lindsay, if you have any particular practices around like time blocking or how you manage your time to ensure that the pace creates the life harmony, work life harmony that you
yeah,
want.
yeah. So one of the things that I try to do for myself, as well as I refer to this in the book, is really think about, okay, I'm going to set a timer, for example,
Mhm.
and just when I'm done, is that just enough? right? It doesn't have to be perfect. Now, I am naturally an 80-20 person. So for the 120 people out there, that may be hard, but I will then ask myself, all right, if I spend another hour on this, am I going to be 1% better? Is it going to be 20% better? And I try to use that kind of 20% rule to say to myself, is this worth my time? Or is this good enough? Um, and it's not that I don't care about quality or excellence. I think I also am just very co creative. And I also believe in if I get it to 80%, by the time I share it with somebody else, then together we might make it even better.
Mhm.
And so I don't have to have it all 100% because that actually is leaving space for others to weigh in and to shape it with me. Does that help
Yeah, that makes
answer the
sense.
question?
Well, I think so. Um, so let's talk for a little bit about what it might look like to build a strong support system, and how others might be able to help contribute to the work-life harmony that we may want to create in our lives.
Yeah. So I think there are two big ways that we can build support systems for ourselves. I think one is just having a supportive core. I think a lot of people on this call are part of my supportive core, and I'm super grateful that they're here. Um, and a supportive core, they can be, your cheerleaders, the like, I got you people. I really appreciate a supportive core that are my no people, that will say, do you really have time for that? Because I am a time optimist and I think, yeah, of course I do. I really value my no people too. Really thinking through who's in your supportive core, and they may be truth tellers, not just cheerleaders. And then networking. So, networking, I think, is super important for work life harmony for a variety of reasons. But one of the primary reasons relates a little bit back to pacing as well, because when we're in an organization, especially if we're working on something cross functionally or where we have kind of an end user, when we're well networked, we have the ability to check in with people. You can check in, is this the right time? Is this the right messaging? What concerns do people have? Or, oh, you're working on a similar project. Well, I don't want to duplicate, right? That'll save me time there too and energy. Can we work together? Or can I, when you're done with your projects ahead of mine, great, I'll build off of yours. So there's a lot of different ways to, leverage networking and a supportive core to support our work life harmony. And sometimes we just need somebody to vent to or to, just be with us in a moment, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah.
So at the beginning, we asked the question about where people are in their current work experience, and one of the answers that we had about maybe 18% of people said, I'm burnt out and looking for change. So we've
Mm.
talked about a lot of different ways to fuel work-life harmony today. I'm curious, like, what would be the number one thing that you would recommend to someone if they said, I'm in that place of burnout and looking for change?
Yeah. So I'll share a stat that I have been shouting from the rooftops, which is SHRM, the Society for Human Resources Management, did a study that showed that belonging, actually, employees who experience a sense of belonging are 2.5 times less likely to burn out. And so for me, what that says is when you have that mountain of work coming to you, a lot of people get into that, "Oh, I've got to get it done. I got to get it done. I got to get it done." And they just hunker down and work even more, which contributes more to the burnout. versus lifting up and figuring out, who do I need to connect with? Who, how do I tap into relationship to refuel myself? All of that being said, that would be my number one suggestion to try out. I think what I would also clarify is there is a difference between burnout and workaholism. And so, just phoning a friend may not be enough if you may legitimately um, be struggling with workaholism, which is much more of a internal pull to always be working.
Thank you for that, Lindsay. So I know we've had a ton of questions coming in the chat, and we're going to
Yeah.
shift in a moment and take some
Yeah.
of your questions that Wendy's been gathering throughout the call so far. But before we do that, I just want a chance to help our listeners, our attendees today find out how they can stay more closely connected to you, Lindsay. The first thing is that Working Hell to Working Well is available online at all your favorite retailers. And we would encourage you to grab copies for yourself and for your team today. If you have already read the book, or when you do read the book, Amazon reviews are one of the most important ways that authors can help to expand the reach of their books. And these are very important messages that Lindsay is sharing, messages of deep hope for those of us who want to work with more harmony. So we would encourage you, once you've read the book, to please leave a review. If you're enjoying this event, or if you enjoy the book, we would love to help get your help expanding awareness of the book on your social media channels. For those of you who may be connected to a podcast, you have a podcast, or you bring in speakers to your organization, we would encourage you to invite Lindsay and help expand awareness of this work that way. Finally, you can find out more by visiting workinghell2workingwell.com, where you'll find more resources about the book. So anything else you want to say about this, Linz?
Just a quick aside, it's only available on Amazon.
Good to know.
Yes,
Thank
yes.
you.
Only
Thank
available
you for
on
that.
Amazon, and then also on the website, you'll see there's also workshops and group coaching. So there's a lot of other ways to I can try to support you or your organization.
Amazing. Thank you for that clarification, Lindsay. I appreciate it. All right. So a couple of questions that we have that have come in. Kimberly is asking, first with some framing. I've worked in tech and on the agency side, and folks are penalized for not being available 24/7. How do you apply these guardrails to work environments that expect constant accessibility?
So first, I just want to acknowledge that this is hard, and this is what a lot of us are dealing with, and it's going to take courage because you may need to be the person who role models it for others, and it's really hard to be the first. So I just want to acknowledge and own that. um, I would say, this is where starting small. What are the little things that you can do to create some boundaries for yourself? um, I had a coaching client who felt that pressure, the always on 24/7 and whatnot, and she just said, you know what, I'm going to take 30 minutes for lunch. And that's me time. And that is what I am going to do for my own sanity and whatnot. That was where she landed, which it feels awful to me to say that you like have to like create conditions like to take lunch, right? Like, please. But that was where we landed, right? That was what felt comfortable for her in terms of drawing a line in the sand of what she felt she could do. And, again, the beauty of it is she was working from home. And so her husband joined her for lunch. So not only did she take some time for her care and well being and kind of drew a line in the sand, but she also got some connection energy with her husband. uh, out of it too. So I just share that as an example of you may not be able to do it all and you may not be able to do it all the time, but how can you be opportunistic if a meeting gets canceled on you at the last minute? Instead of just working more, go take a walk. You know, you can take a look at it opportunistically. You can, if you feel very courageous, you can try to have more of a negotiation around boundaries. I love people's kind of out of office messages when they say, you know, I'm off here, I'll be back to you shortly. And oftentimes people are like, great, talk to you in a half hour or talk to you in an hour. So I think it's really up to us to see how reasonable are people, because I tend to think people are a little bit more reasonable than we sometimes give them credit for.
For sure. This is a very similar question, but Diana was wondering, how do you get management buy-in? So I imagine this is related to how do you get management buy-in for more flexibility, or how do you get more management buy-in for work-life harmony?
Yeah, yeah. And again, this is hard stuff. Um, you know, you can share the book with your manager and say, "Hey, would love to embed some of this." Um, but you don't have to wait. I think that's one of the big things in the book is you can start being the change that you want to see. Once you start, you're going to start finding more allies, right? Who also want to see this change. You don't have to go this alone. And one of the things that I talk about in my book is just courageous negotiating, that you may need to start somewhere. And I give a specific example from actually a coaching client who was feeling very burned out and did try to have the conversation with her boss. Unfortunately, it did not go very far, so we found some other workarounds for her. um, but I think being really mindful of coming up with some options, it makes it less of a binary, hey, can I work from home on Thursday? Is a yes, no question versus here's what I'm thinking. Here's the plan. Here are the options. What do you think? Right? It becomes more of a negotiation and more of a conversation. And so trying to find that right place that feels comfortable for you between advocacy, and having a win-win mindset. Here's how I think this could work, as well as experimentation. If you want to stop writing a report, hey, can we just try not writing and issuing this report this week? See if anyone complains, right? If you want it to be monthly instead of weekly, because that's better for what you've got going on. How do you start crafting some of these mini experiments? But it may take time, but
Well,
you always have actions you can take.
yeah, when I was thinking of this or listening to, one thing that occurred to me was a colleague of mine, someone who works at my company, who left for a while and worked somewhere else, and found that there wasn't the flexibility and wasn't the opportunity to negotiate. And it seems like if you're starting a new job, that would be the time to ask all the questions so that you're ensuring that you make a commitment to an organization who will support your well-being in the workplace or your work-life harmony. If you
Yeah.
happen to be in that situation of looking for a new position.
Yeah. And even that is can be scary for people, right? Because we're operating under the not so helpful mindset that everyone is expecting us to be available all the time. So, but that is a great place to start for
Yeah.
sure if you're feeling it. And it could be part of your decision making criteria.
Mhm. Like, I'll only choose to work at a place where, and make a list of what that looks like for you.
Yeah.
So Heidi was wondering, curious, if while writing the book you had any aha moments or further clarity through the process of writing, I'm guessing.
Yeah. I think, what actually struck me was I started writing this book because I was concerned about the state of the workplace. I was angry. I was frustrated. I had all of these just, why does it have to be this way? um, kind of feelings. And through the course of the book, and I note this in the conclusion, I actually landed in a place of optimism that really pleasantly surprised me, that we've got this. We can do this, but we all have to do it, right? If each of us takes one action and then that sparks another action, right? Eventually there will be a tsunami of well-being, hopefully, in the workplace. Um, but we have to start. So to me, that's my hope, is that the book, you can come back to it whenever you want. It was designed to be a pick up, read a little, put it down, or read it all at once and pick it up again. Like it was designed to be a support for taking action when you need it. And, you know, that's my hope, is that we all start to take action and that my optimism is real.
Well, I love that you started writing with this sense of frustration and anger maybe at the state of things and ended the book with hopefulness. And, hopefully everyone on the call, if you started at the beginning of this call feeling frustration about being in a working hell, hopefully Lindsay's given you some hope as well. Question from Trevor. Are there simple tools or methods for assessing my or others' level of balance or imbalance? And how do you gauge that status when you're drowning in the swamp?
Oh, Trevor. So I'm sure there are tools that are out there. I think where I tend to go is, it is very individual. There is no magic formula, as much as I would love to say, do these 8 things. But, there are clues. um, so I think, you know, starting with what people are noticing, naming the feelings, right? Just starting there. Um, there are tools out there. You can do kind of a weekly audit, right? Where are you spending your time really creating data for yourself? So while there may not be a specific, if you've checked all these boxes, great, you're in work-life harmony, because it's fluid, right? Life is fluid. Today I'm feeling good. Tomorrow I may have a sick kid. I don't know. So, but you can start by getting data for yourself, right? And just noticing, and I have a lot of these exercises in the book if it's useful. But just noticing, what are some of your work behaviors, right? Are you in meetings from 9 to 5? What happens if you build in a 30-minute lunch? What happens when you change to 45-minute meetings instead of an hour-long meeting? What happens when you check email at certain times of the day versus all day, right? How do you start creating some experiments for yourself and then noticing the ones that actually work? So, one of the stories I share in my book is, I had a colleague who, he didn't take vacation for a very long time because he was so busy, and he was about to lose it all. And so he was like, "Well, I don't want to lose it all." So he started building out weeks where he had 1 month where he got approval from his manager, and whatever was happening at work worked. He took off every Monday and Friday that month, and he kind of practiced a part-time schedule for a month. He said it was the most productive, the most creative, and the most resilient he's ever felt in his work life. So looking at the different ingredients in your recipe, getting some data, and then taking action, experimenting, trying things, seeing what works. that's really the mindfulness component.
So as you were saying that, Lindsay, I was wondering about, there's been a lot in the news about people who are proposing that a 32-hour work week would actually be
Mhm.
more productive for workers, like as a full-time work week. And I'm curious
Yeah.
if you have any perspective about that.
Yeah, yeah. And I've done a lot of research around the 4-day work week,
Hmm.
and really appreciate what they're trying to do and some of the results that they have seen. I've socialized that with people and talking about this book, and some people say, you know, that sounds great, and some people say that sounds way more stressful. And so I think, some of it is what's going to work for you at the end of the day. Again, how do we move outside these hours construct into thinking about our outcomes? How do we work best? What's going to give us our best, work life balance? But I would love for companies to offer that for sure, because for people who do think they can take an advantage of it, it would have incredible, you know, benefits for them.
Thanks for that. So Duval is asking, when processes change frequently or when processes changes are frequent, I'm not exactly sure, and not as regular, how can I motivate my staff as a manager and not get weary during this short time of changes? So I'm
Okay.
I'm not quite exactly sure what that means. Let's see if we can figure it out.
Okay. Hi, Duval. Thanks for the question. I think what you're asking is that when things change, there's often a kind of uptick in work or an uptick in maybe a lack of flexibility because there's just more to be done because we're learning. And so I think what I would offer is a couple things. One, acknowledging that you're learning, acknowledging that things are going to be hard, creating that safe space to help people who are in transition from the end of something. And there may be emotions and feelings about that to the beginning. But if we just keep saying, oh, it's going to be great, 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 we're not acknowledging where people are at in the moment, and then being able to share with people when they have made a move, even if it's a little move in the right direction, celebrating that, supporting that, even potentially acknowledging, great. So it took you 3 hours yesterday. It's only taking you 2 hours today. Like, that's huge. That's a 50% shift, or maybe one third. I don't know. I can't do math right now. But that's a shift. Like we're making progress. So that can be very motivating for people to just acknowledge that progress is being made. And as you get closer to the light at the end of the tunnel, then starting to talk about, we're almost there, right? We're almost there. That, being able to look ahead can also be really supportive for people. But it is hard when there's so much change. It really is the only constant, as the saying goes. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. So Sarah was referencing what you shared, Lindsay, about the importance of a sense of belonging in the workplace. So for leaders who are watching this webinar, what can they do to support their teams in feeling a sense of belonging?
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of things that that they can do. I think I'll just kind of frame it up from a few different places. So the first is in your one-on-ones, right? How are you getting to know them as a human? Some people may be private, some people may be less so, but how are you inviting them to share a little bit more of their whole self with you? So that's one way of doing it. And if they're more private, then that's okay. You can just say, share what you want. I'm happy to share. So you may have to role model the sharing of, this is how I work and whatnot. So, looking at it from a one-on-one perspective, when you're in a team setting, you can certainly make sure that, everyone feels heard. I know that I try to set ground rules in my workshops around balanced participation. So, priming people to think about when maybe they're taking over a conversation or they're not contributing as much to a conversation. Um, but better understanding from people, how do you how do you want me to include you in team meetings? So sometimes just asking people outright, what will help you feel a sense of belonging? Um, to the extent you can, being mindful of the social dynamics on your team. Do people seem like they have a friend at work? Which is a big driver of engagement, as we know from the Gallup organization. Are there in groups or out and out groups? To the extent you can, how can you make a more inclusive environment? Um, so, and then obviously, as you think about the macro culture in an organization, um, you know, potentially connecting people if your organization has employee resource groups, or, supporting them in their networking so that they feel like they have a better understanding, or they have other people in the organization, or helping them find their supportive core. So there's a lot of different ways that managers can help. It takes intention.
Those are a lot of great ideas that I'm taking note of, Lindsay, to use them with my team, and I'm sure those who are attending today's session are doing the same. So we are coming to the end of our hour. Just like you said, Lindsay, when you're doing something that you enjoy, it just the time feels like nothing. So just a reminder as we wrap up today, if you have found the ideas in this webinar to be helpful, you can get Working Hell to Working Well on Amazon. You can also find out more about other ways to engage with the material through workshops and other group experiences that Lindsay can create. You can visit workinghelltoworkingwell.com to find out more. We would love your support in spreading awareness of this book through social media, through podcasts, through newsletters. And we put some resources in the chat that will make it easy for you to do that, I believe. And once you've read the book, your Amazon review is critically important for helping other readers to discover this book. So we would appreciate an Amazon review. Even only a couple of sentences can have a big impact. So Lindsay, I want to turn it back to you as we wrap up the hour. What are some parting thoughts that you would like to leave our listeners with?
I think, one, you've got this. First and foremost, you've got this. And if you need more help, I'm here. And two, if nothing else, you always have the power of the pause. If you can't do anything else, you always have the ability to take a deep breath, pause, think about what's going to be most helpful for you in the moment. So you've got this. Be the change. And
Thank you so
thank
much.
you. Thank you all for joining. I really appreciate it. And I hope you all can help me get this book into the hands of somebody who needs it. So thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.